Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. We're going to talk about the speech sounds of English, and we are going to be talking about, there was a question in the chat, low level or high. I would encourage everyone to think about this as all levels. I am a reading specialist at Carlow University. I spent the bulk of my career in public education. Over 20 years as a reading specialist, working with all different types of learners. And so now I work at Carlow University. I'm the director of the MED in Reading Specialist program, and I'm honored to be here working with you today to talk about your adolescent and adult learners. Some of the information that I'll give you, if it's too technical, just let me know. Say, hey Val, break it down a little bit for me, and I'm happy to do that. I've devoted my whole life to reading and writing, so this is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about dyslexia too, and ensuring that all students learn to read and write proficiently and achieve full literacy. My first job was in Carnegie Library in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And I think I never left. I just stayed in reading and continued in writing, and here I am. So I hope that I'm able to offer you something today that's going to help your learners grow and achieve full literacy as well. All right. So without further ado, I would like to just hear a little bit about why you might choose this workshop. So that bold question there, what are you doing here? You can either unmute and say it, or you can just type it in the chat. If you can find the chat, you can just say something very simple or something very technical. And I can see the chat, or Miguel, you can read them, whichever you're most comfortable doing, but I'll just wait about 30 seconds to see what you're interested in about this topic.
What would you like to talk?
So new for me, okay, main focus will be reading. All right, wonderful. Okay, new student, good, awesome. So I'm assuming word level reading difficulties or getting word level reading up to speed with that. Thank you for that.
I'm an educator, and I've worked in early intervention with very young children, and also as a classroom teacher. I'm an elementary certified in elementary, and when I have an adult learner, I find it much more challenging than when I am working with kids. I don't want to be condescending, and I want to have the right material to work with them. But I think it's more challenging because with kids, you sort of know the ballpark you're in, but with adults, it's sometimes hard to know. Even if you have test scores, it's sometimes hard to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm also seeing just learning everything I can. New tutor, different ways of reaching low-level adult learners with comorbidities. So yeah, students, adult learners that, I'm sorry, I always say students because everybody's a student to me, even my grad students. But yes, adolescent and adult learners, yeah, absolutely, that have multiple areas that they struggle in. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit too. Okay, thank you, everyone. To assist my students and increase her success in reading and pronunciation. Good. Gosh, I wish we had more time. The challenge is to get from reading and to writing. You have English as second language students at various levels. Okay, thank you everyone for letting me know where you are and why you're here. So thanks. So just thinking about some of the learning intentions for this hour, because we're together very briefly. But good thing there's a recording, and you can go back and read through some of this and dig a little deeper into the areas that you find most helpful to you and your students and your learners, excuse me. So we're going to examine something called the simple view of reading, and we'll look at our adult learners, and we'll think about our adult learners in relationship to, what is reading comprehension, because that's the goal of reading, and what makes up reading comprehension. Subtypes of reading difficulties, someone put in there about comorbidities that exist. So we'll talk about the subtypes of reading difficulties that exist in all learners, and ways that we can close those gaps so that our learners are on the path to achieve full literacy. We're going to talk about how the brain learns to read. And I like this here because yes, whether we're talking about children, whether we're talking about adolescents or adults, whether we're talking about English as a second language learner, what we're talking about is the brain. And we're thinking about the brain as how the brain learns to read. A lot of the information that has been fed into our school systems for decades has been misinformation on how the brain learns to read and how we should teach students to learn to read. So what has happened is students graduate and now they're out in the world and they haven't achieved full literacy. 2/3 of our nation's 4th and 8th graders are reading below proficiency. And that gap continues, and then they make it through to graduation and they're not literate. We'll talk about phonology, and then we'll get into an overview of the speech sounds of English by place and manner of articulation. Place, where in the mouth those phonemes are occurring, and manner, what's happening with the airflow. By knowing this, especially teaching English language learners and knowing the difference between, say, English and Spanish vowel phonemes, just taking that language in particular, then we know better how to assist our learners in gaining access to these speech sounds and producing these speech sounds, so they can read and then write with these speech sounds. And then we'll talk about just some implications for your instruction, and hopefully we'll have some time for our questions as well. So that simple view of reading that I was talking about earlier with you, perhaps you've seen before. But when we talk about the simple view of reading, you might have a learner that struggles with word level reading skills. So they're either going to struggle with phonology, so hearing those phonemes in the words. They're going to struggle with alphabetic principle or decoding. So putting the sound with the symbol and then blending what's left over. Or they're going to struggle with sight word recognition, which is reading the words as if by sight. So they're just kind of popping off the page after they've decoded them, and they've learned to do that rather quickly. So the student might struggle there, or the learner might struggle here. So they might struggle with something like background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, which is syntax or sentence level comprehension. They might struggle with verbal reasoning, which could be making inferences or identifying metaphors in a text, or they could struggle with literacy knowledge. So thinking about knowledge of genre, like if they're reading a narrative text, do they know setting, character, problem, solution? If they're reading an informational piece, can they identify, okay, this is written in sequential order, or this is written in problem solution or cause and effect, or whatever. If they're reading an opinion argument piece or an op-ed, they're looking for claim, reason, evidence. So all of those items play a part in language comprehension. Word recognition times language comprehension, both of these elements together, getting the words off the page and understanding the language, contribute then to reading comprehension. You can't have one without the other. So as a reading specialist, the questions I ask for my readers is, does my student struggle with word recognition? Does my student struggle with language comprehension? Or does my student struggle with both? And then I move forward through there. So one of the things I want to draw your attention to is this particular chart. When we look at this chart, we see that some students, just like we talked about, might struggle with word recognition. So they might struggle with alphabetic principle. They might struggle with sight word recognition. They might struggle with phonology, or all three. But they're okay on language comprehension. And language comprehension is listening comprehension. So if you read the story or the text to them, they can comprehend. When we look at our data across our states with our students, we see that this is our second largest subtype, okay? This one, however, is our largest subtype when we look at our data. So we see that this student not only struggles with word recognition, but also struggles with language comprehension. So that comorbidity exists there. Largest subtype. It's alarming, right? Now, when we look here, we see students that have okay word recognition. They can get the words off the page, but they really struggle here with language comprehension. Now, this is different than this because this is students with dyslexia often fall in this particular category because they can't decode and they can't get those words off the page to even access the language when they're reading independently. But up here, these students don't seem to have a problem here, but they struggle with the language pieces, the vocabulary, the background knowledge, the knowledge of genre, all of that. These students might be our English language learners because of a language barrier. That you might have heard the word hyperlexic before. It's opposite of dyslexic. They might be students that we have that are on the autistic spectrum. But then I draw your attention to this category right here. And in this particular category, this is where we want all of our learners to end up and be, where they have good word recognition, they can get the words off the page, and they can understand the language. Now, in our systems, school systems, 95 to 97% of students should end up here, can achieve this with systematic, explicit, multimodal, diagnostic, and intensive instruction. There's just a small percentage of students that shouldn't end up here because they have a severe cognitive disability. But other than that, all students should be in this category. So you might be asking yourself, well, why are there adolescents and adults out there that still struggle to learn to read? And we're going to talk a little bit about the brain and how the brain learns to read. Okay, so the reading brain, when we think about that reading brain, our brain is amazing. We process language in the left hemisphere of the brain. We know this through fMRI images. The reading brain, inside our reading brain, everybody's reading brain, we have 4 processing systems. We have a phonological processor where we process the pronunciation, the articulation of the phonemes, the sounds in our language. We have an orthographic processor where we process the shapes, the squiggles, the lines, the curves that are our letters. Our brain doesn't see an A, a B, a C, and a D. It sees a shape, a line, a squiggle, a curve. And we know that our brains must be explicitly taught sound, symbol, or phoneme grapheme correspondences in order to map those words and read them as if by sight. They're just popping off the page. Teaching students to read that whole word approach, it doesn't work, right? Even for our adolescent and adult learners, we have to consider their reading brain. We have to consider how they're going to learn to read, and they're going to learn to read through explicit instruction in sound symbol, connecting the phonological with the orthographic processor. Whole word approaches and cueing systems are poor strategies to use with readers. So we don't want to use strategies that poor readers use. 2 more processing systems. We have meaning and context as well. Sorry, I didn't mention those. I was focusing on the bottom portions. So they all work together to gain access to our language. All right, here's just a picture of the reading brain. And let me grab my annotation tool for a minute and I'll kind of orient you to this. But this is just a book that I'll reference to you in case you wanted to follow up and read a little bit more about our reading brain and your own reading brain. But we talked about that pronunciation, articulation, and that prefrontal lobe right up here. That's where those speech sounds that we talk about, all that's happening, right? In the very back of the brain is where our brain takes in the shapes, the squiggles, the lines, the curves that we know as letters. They don't see the A, the B, the C, and the D. And then we have this angular gyrus or phonics bridge in the brain. It's actually just a fold in the brain. And that fold is where our brain connects the phonemes to the graphemes. Now there's this little area, when I keep talking about sight word recognition, there's this little area in the brain, in everybody's brain, called the visual word form area. That's where we store words with the meaning and everything after we've mapped them with their phoneme and grapheme. So after they've been previously deciphered and decoded. For some learners, this could take 1 to 4 times for the typically developing learner. For others, it could take hundreds. Really? Okay. So you know my passion is dyslexia. And the reason why this particular workshop will focus on phonology and the phonemes in our English language is because students with dyslexia struggle in something called the phonological core. And that means they have difficulty putting phonemes together, pulling phonemes apart, isolating phonemes, and then eventually connecting those phonemes to their graphemes. So when we look at this, we look at the non-dyslexic brain and we see a lot of activity here. And when we see a lot of activity here, we're excited because students are mapping phonemes and graphemes. But when we look at the dyslexic brain, we see that there's not a lot of blood flow and activity happening. They're not mapping the phonemes to the graphemes because perhaps they're not getting systematic explicit instruction in sound symbol correspondence. And let's take a look at something encouraging though. With explicit instruction, after just 8 weeks of specialized tutoring in sound symbol correspondences, there's more activation in that area, the angular gyrus area, where we want to see our brain mapping sounds and symbols. They're starting to read. So it's encouraging for us to know that through our instruction, we can actually perform brain surgery and get students and all learners to learn to read. Okay, so now comes the good part, the part we're all here for. So we're going to focus on phonology and thinking about the articulatory gestures. We'll think about how sounds are produced. Notice where in the mouth the phoneme is being produced. So it's either going to be being produced in the front of the mouth, in the middle of the mouth, or in the back of the mouth. Think about your learners that are learning to read and write. They need phonemes and graphemes, and they need to store the correct pronunciation and articulation of the phoneme so that they can map it to the grapheme, the letter, sound to the letter, and read words. Think about your English language learners. Half of these phonemes don't even exist in their language. They don't even have neural pathways in their brain that exist for these phonemes. So we have to be extremely explicit when we teach these phonemes to our readers, especially our English as a second language learners. And then we're going to identify what's happening with the airflow. So place, where in the mouth it's happening, front, middle, and back, or airflow, manner. What's happening with the airflow? Is it a puff of air? Is it a stream of air? Is something getting in the way as we produce that sound, that phoneme, either our lips, our teeth, our tongue? Or is the airflow coming through our nose, the nasals? And with those phonemes, those are the trickiest to learn. And learners often omit those phonemes when they're writing, and they often have difficulty producing those phonemes because they get absorbed by the sounds that surround them. So when you're teaching your learners, one thing to consider when you're teaching these phonemes explicitly are these elements. Use mirrors. Use mirrors, small little mirrors. I have little mirrors here that you can look at your lips, your teeth, your tongue as you're producing these phonemes. Make sure you say, does your mouth look like my mouth? When I say the phoneme, p, p, take a look, p, p. Because you want to be very explicit. If they're not phonemes that they currently have in their language, you want to be extremely explicit so they can produce these. That's the first thing. You could use a tissue to see the release of air. And where's my tissue? B, b, the difference. That's one way also to see it. And you could feel your throat, and I'm going to model these. And when you feel your throat, that's where your voice box is. That's where your vocal cords are. And they vibrate with our voiced phonemes. So we're going to say, is your voice box turned on or is your voice box turned off when you produce this phoneme? Okay, everybody with me so far? So interesting, right? All these things that go into learning to read in our language. Okay, so if we focus on phonology here, and we're thinking about place and manner of articulation, you'll look at this chart. And these are our consonant phonemes, our consonant sounds by place, where in the mouth the phoneme is occurring. Sorry, this got cut off here. And by manner, this is what's happening with the airflow. So you can all do this with me. You're all muted up, so you don't have to worry about what you sound like. But when we're explicitly teaching these phonemes to our learners, we want to think about what type of phoneme is this? How do I describe it in ways so they know what's happening? So we'll just practice some together. So we have these stops, and you can use a couple different things to look at your mouth. You can use your cell phone, turn it into selfie mode. Oh, we all love that. It's probably already in selfie mode, right? You can use a tissue in some cases to feel that airflow or puff of air, not in all. You can use a little mirror if you have one. I just use these little ones with my students because it helps them focus just on what's happening with their mouth, not their hair and their eyes and everything else. And then I use something with my students. These are called kid lips. So I know you're working with adolescents and adults. However, these are called kid lips and they show us the mouth regardless of which age level you're working with. It's a great visual. You could say, does your mouth look like this mouth? And I'll show you some in a little bit. So as we're being very explicit and we want our learners to be able to produce these phonemes so that they can map them to their graphemes and eventually read and write with them, this is the first step, okay? So the first ones are stops. And there's a puff of air that comes out. So everybody say, p, p, and put your hand in front of your mouth. P, p. Do you feel that puff of air? Mm-hmm. Now hold your hand over your voice box, your throat, and say, p. Do your voice box, are your vocal cords vibrating? Mm-mm. Our lips are together, p, and we feel that puff of air. P. Make your mouth look like my mouth. Yes, but now keep your lips in the same position, make the same movement. Nothing's going to change with your lips, but now turn your voice box on. P, b, p, b. You see, nothing changed here. The only difference was in voicing. P, b, p, b. This could cause confusion for our learners. And they write in a way that shows either voiced or unvoiced, and they have confusion there, especially when these phonemes don't even exist in their language. Okay, next, move to the middle, tongue on the ridge behind your teeth. Try this one. T, t. Now try d. Same position of your lips, your teeth, and your tongue. The only difference is in voicing. T, d, t, d. So we want to tell our learners, make your mouth look like my mouth. Does your mouth look like my mouth? T. Where's your tongue? Your tongue is on the ridge behind your teeth. And if they're confusing voiced and unvoiced consonant sounds, then you can say, oh, I see what you're doing. Just turn your voice box on or turn your voice box off, but keep it in the same position. Now, our last stop that we're going to talk about are these ones, right? They're the back of the throat. So we have the k and the, turn your voice box on, g, k, g. Now, one thing we want to be mindful of when we're producing these phonemes and we're teaching our learners these phonemes is to not add additional sounds. We don't want to say pa, ba, ta, da, ka, or ga, because when we pull those sounds apart and those phonemes apart in a word, we don't want extra sounds on there, because then students write graphemes, letters that represent those extra sounds, and they're not attached to that word. So we want to make sure we clip our sounds. We want a nice, clean sound, a nice, clean phoneme. P, b, t, d, k, g. Okay. Now these are our nasals. And in this case, the nasals are going through, the airflow is going through the nose. Okay. So if we plug our nose, the sound is obstructed. Everybody say, Front of the mouth, middle of the mouth, with the tongue on the ridge behind your teeth. Good. And then back of the throat, that phoneme we all love to hate. In Pittsburgh, our language variation is to pronounce that hard G. So we say things like sing, and it comes out, but really it's way back in the back of our throat, and it's different than this phoneme. So we have three nasals: front of the mouth, middle of the mouth, and back of the mouth. If we plug our nose and say the airflow is obstructed, and that phoneme can't happen. Think about when you have a cold, you get really stuffy and you talk like this, right? Because you can't, I'm not a good imitator of having a cold. I don't have a cold right now, but you know what I'm talking about. You talk like this because you're all stuffed up. The airflow can't go through your nose. So students have a lot of difficulty with these phonemes, especially when they go to write them, they leave them out. Because if they're thinking about a word they want to write, say they want to write the word stamp, and they think about the phonemes, they'll leave out that many of the times because it's influenced by the neighboring sounds and it gets absorbed. Okay, one other tidbit I forgot to tell you is that phonemes that are produced in the front of the mouth are easiest for our learners to learn. Middle of the mouth, second easiest, and back of the throat, the most difficult for our learners to learn. So keep that in mind as you're teaching these and how explicit you have to be as you move towards the back of the mouth. Okay, now we have these fricatives, and these fricatives, think about it exactly the way it sounds. Think about the word fricative. What does it sound like? It sounds like friction, right? So something is getting in the way, either our lips, our teeth, or our tongue as we're producing that phoneme. So try this. Everybody say, hold your throat, feel your vocal cords. It's not a puff of air. It's kind of like a stream of air. Our teeth on our lip are getting in the way and our vocal cords aren't engaged. That's unvoiced. But keep your teeth on your lip in the same position. Say, now turn your voice box on. Nothing different is happening here. The only difference is in voicing. So you can see how this can cause confusion if you're learning our English language for the first time, and especially if you don't have pronunciation of this in the first place. Yes, we have to be very explicit. Now, this next one confuses a lot of people, right? Especially if you're not a hardcore linguist. What happens is we have the tongue between the teeth and we have an unvoiced, nothing's happening here, like in the word thumb. Everybody stick your tongue out. Your vocal cords are not on. But now turn your vocal cords on and do the same thing. That thumb is unvoiced, but them is the voiced TH. Them. You feel that vibrate? Right. And some don't even know that there is a voiced and an unvoiced TH phoneme. And they confuse it. Okay, so now we have the tongue on the ridge behind the teeth. Everyone say, feel your voice box. Is it turned on? Now turn your motor on. You feel that? The only difference is in voicing. Same position, lips, teeth, and tongue, same place in the mouth. The only difference is in voicing. And now we have this one. Tongue pulled back on the roof of the mouth. We have shh, shh, unvoiced. Now keep your lips in the same position, tongue pulled back on the roof of your mouth. Shh, zh, like in genre, like in treasure. That's the only phoneme in our English orthography, in our English language, that isn't represented consistently in our English orthography. You're going to see it spelled a bunch of different ways. Genre, treasure, measure, Zsa Zsa Gabor, right? It's that sound. Good. And now we have this one way in the back. And that's in our glottis. It's a little spot right above our voice box, and it's just like a tight squeeze of the voice box. Way back. All right. Now we have two affricates, and these affricates are confusing because it's kind of like a tug of war. It's like someone's pulling, and you let go, and then there's the phoneme. So it's ch, unvoiced. Ch. Now try j, ch, j, ch, j. Yep, those are our affricates. Now we have these glides. And these glides are tricky because in our standard American English here in the United States, we do not typically pronounce this breathy WH. And this breathy WH is unvoiced, and it's in words like when, why. It's kind of like an HW. Where. Say those WH words. When, why, where. If you feel your voice box, it's probably turned on. When, why, where. And that causes confusion because in British language, they speak that way. When, why, where, wheat. But here we don't. Typically, and language variation, I mean, can play a part in this, dialect, regional dialect. So when we think about this, though, most of the time we'll say it with that rounded lips at the front and our voice box turned on. Wheat, when, and you'll feel that vibration. But know that this phoneme exists, and know we have to teach it because we want students to know, and I want our learners to know how to spell with it. So they don't use the W in specific words, so they know that we have that breathiness in there as well, the unvoiced portion. Now this one is way back, tongue pulled back on the roof of your mouth, and it's when we say glides, which is what we're talking about, what happens is they kind of slide in and glide into the phonemes or the sounds that surround them, and they stick there, and they're hard to pull apart. So it makes it difficult to read and spell. So this particular phoneme is y, y, like in yellow, but it's also in words like cute. Do you hear it? Say cute. Now say cute without the k. Cute. Do you hear that? It's hidden in there. Our last ones we're going to talk about are our liquids. And when we think about our liquids, we have two. And when you think about a liquid, think about taking a bottle of water, shaking it up, and just making it go everywhere. That's what happens inside our mouth when we produce these liquids. So they're very difficult to produce. When students have speech issues, they often have speech issues with these liquids. So it's the ul, and the ul is two different phonemes, really, because two different sounds for this phoneme. At the end of a word, it makes that ul sound. But listen to the word let. It's kind of a flick of the tongue at the beginning of a word. L, l, l. But at the end of the word, it's more of an ul, like the consonant L-E, little, double, trouble. But at the beginning, it's more of a l, l, let, l, l, leap, little flick. Okay. Last one, everybody, we're up to it. This last one is the phoneme that many, many pronounce incorrectly. And this phoneme, think of the word rabbit. That should be your go-to word. Write that word down. Rabbit. That's the clean sound for the phoneme R. It's not R. We don't say R at, a rat. We don't say which many of us pronounce that R sound that way. We don't say at, rat. We say at, rat. So think about the word rabbit And that phoneme at the very beginning for that R, rabbit, that's what sound we want to produce. So when we teach it, we want to teach it like that short clipped seal bark, if you will. It's r, r, like in rabbit. Okay, so everybody with me so far? Good job. Kiss your brain, left side. You're doing great. All right, so we're going to move into this part. And in this part is, now we're going to focus on vowels. Now I'm going to tell you this. If we just take Spanish, for example, in English, we have 18 vowel phonemes. In Spanish, guess how many they have? 5. So when I say to you, look at different languages, and some of these phonemes don't even exist. We could say many or most of these phonemes don't even exist, but these are our English vowel phonemes, and we have 18. And instead of by place and manner of articulation, we have to be very, very, very explicit when we teach these. We can't leave anything to chance because students of all ages confuse these vowel sounds because they're close in order of articulation. There's just slight differences between them. Let me show you. Okay, I'm going to start up here. Now watch my chin. I'm going to put my hand under my chin. Watch my chin as I move this way and then back up, and I say my phonemes, okay, my vowel phonemes. E, I, A, I, A. Did you see my mouth drop? But it's very subtle. Now I'm going to go back up. A, O, U, U. So my mouth then comes back up and starts to round. Now, when I'm way up here, it's like when the cameraman says to us, say cheese. Everyone say cheese. Cheese, it's that phoneme. E, it's very tense. Good. So look, I want to show you something. When we introduce these vowel phonemes, our students are going to have difficulty with them because they're very close in order of articulation. So if we look at something like I and I and if you teach those very close together to your learner, then they're going to continually have difficulty discriminating between the two. It's like you could fit a fingernail between your teeth as you say Watch my mouth. It's almost produced identically. And so there's just a subtle difference in order of articulation. We have the diphthongs as a vowel in our English language too, and they say 2 mouth movements, but 1 phoneme. Oi, oi. So 1 phoneme, but 2 mouth movements. And then this one, ow, ow. 2 mouth movements, 1 phoneme. We also have R-controlled vowels. We have R, and or in our English language, which everyone struggles with. So if you're teaching English language learners, it's going to be even worse. And then when we're looking here, this is our schwa, and schwa happens. It happens, and it can be represented by any vowel grapheme. Any vowel grapheme can make the schwa sound, and it occurs in unaccented syllables. And it makes the lazy sound, the flat sound. It makes the sound of I or And it can cause confusion and wreak havoc on our learners' spelling because they hear one thing, pull those phonemes apart, and write another. So take the word banana. Everyone say banana. There's schwas in there, right? And when we say the word ba, what do we hear? We hear but how do we spell it? We spell it with an A. Nan, There's 2 schwas in the unaccented syllables. Ba, nan, So when our voice is down like that and unaccented, we hear that schwa sound. And when students go to write it and they pull that apart, what are they going to write? You got it. They're going to write a U. And so if we don't know, we don't have knowledge of schwa and how schwa happens, and it can happen in unaccented syllables, then our students aren't going to have knowledge of that either. Okay, so let me check my time. All right, I'm doing good. So everybody do this with me, just so you can get to feel the slight difference that happens between these phonemes. Okay, so start up here with me, and we're going to work our way down, and we're going to say, I can't do both at one time, but we're going to say the vowel phonemes by order of articulation. Ready? E, I, A, A, I, aw, 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 o, oo, u. Do you feel how your chin just drops ever so slightly and then goes back up ever so slightly between these phonemes? When I said to you, if we teach phonemes like I and that are very close in order of articulation, close together in our instruction, like I teach I one week and the next, I'm in trouble because my students are constantly going to confuse words like pit and pet forever. So we want to teach them far apart in order of articulation. When you're teaching them, you want to start saying I and teach aw next, so they can feel the dramatic I, aw, I, aw. Now these two sounds of long U, this one has that hidden glide in it. So this is the sound like in chew. Everyone say chew. Now say chew, but don't say ch, ooh. That's the long U sound. Chew, ooh. Now this one is like in that word cute that I gave you. Everyone say cute. Now say cute, but don't say k. Ute. That's that one. All righty. Okay. Wish we could spend more time on there, but we're not. So I do, well, no, maybe I'll come back to that. Okay, so one of the ways that I approach this type of instruction is through something called structured literacy. Okay, structured literacy is systematic. That means it's taught in a way that makes sense in order that I'm teaching my students. Explicit, that means there's nothing left out. There's no guesswork involved. I'm teaching them explicitly how to do this. Multimodal, which means I'm giving my learners ample opportunity to see, say, hear, write, touch, move, feel what I'm asking them to do, not just one modality. That helps to create the neural pathways in the brain for the work that we're asking our students to learn. Diagnostic, which I have to assess to make sure that this is what I should be teaching my learner and my learner's making progress. And intensive means that I'm working very diligently with this learner. I'm making sure that I'm not leaving anything to chance and that everything is in place to ensure success. If it's not being successful, then I'm going to either have to change my instruction, change my duration, how long I'm instructing it, or change the frequency, how often I'm doing it. Okay, so just some things that I'll share with you that I do with my actual students, and this might help with your adult and adolescent learners as well. Just an instructional routine to consider. And when we think about the instructional routine on the page here, these are free. And they are through Florida Center for Reading Research. And what it does is it pulls this I do, we do, you do approach into how we're teaching our learners. So it gives our students ample opportunity for us to model and them to feel and see that, for us to do with them, do together, and then ample opportunity for them to do by themselves. So gradually releasing them into independence. So this is just one example, but the teacher models, and then the teacher and students practice together. This is just about segmenting in phonemes. Students practice, and then more independent practice. So if you go to Florida Center for Reading Research, and if you even search empowering teachers, Florida Center for Reading Research, FCRR, you'll be able to find lesson plans like this for phonemic awareness, sounds, phonics, decoding, vocabulary, comprehension, and fluency. So you'll be able to find a plan like this that you might be able to tailor so you can provide that explicit instruction for your student. Okay. So we talk about this multisensory instruction. And when we think about the levels of phonological and phonemic awareness, when we're teaching phonological, so hearing those bigger parts, concept of a word, right? So I go to the store. I is one word, go is another, to the store, right? So being able to identify, especially for English language learners, the concept of a word is huge because I'll give you an example. I took 3 years of Spanish and I went to Catholic grade school, high school, and university. And when the nuns taught me Spanish, right? And so I don't know if any of you tried to learn a second language, or perhaps you do know a second language, but when I do trainings across the United States, I ask this question: how many tried to learn a second language? And mostly everyone says yes. And I say, okay, how many of you have been successful? And mostly everyone says no. So with that said, we know how difficult it is to learn another language. And so when we think about pulling even concepts at the word level, getting us to know at the word level, I took 3 years of Spanish and the nuns taught me Spanish. And this is all I remember. Y el nombre del Padre, del Espíritu Santo, Amen. I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly, but I'm telling it to you because I can't pull those apart. I can't segment those words, even as I'm saying it, because I don't have knowledge of that in that language. So if you can't segment at the word level, then you can't get to the phoneme level, then you can't get to the advanced phoneme level, then you can't map those phonemes to the graphemes or the letters and read and spell with them. So all of this is so important. So we think about early phonological awareness, syllables, how many syllables are in the word alligator, alligator, right? Alliteration, hearing the first sound in words and identifying like which words have the same first sound. And you could say bat, cat, ball, and they would say bat and ball, hearing that first sound. So their brain has to isolate that first sound, that first phoneme. Onset rhyme. So if we have something like the word is boat, what word? Boat. What's the onset? So that first consonant, b. What's the rhyme? Oat. Say boat without the b. What do you get? Oat. Say boat without the oat. What do you get? B. So being able to manipulate that. Basic is blending and segmenting 3 to 4 phonemes. So if I asked you to pull apart the phonemes in the word shack, let's tap them. Sh, a, k. What's the word? Shack. Good. So we want to pull them together and pull them apart and push them together so students can eventually attach graphemes to those and decode. You see how this all builds upon one another? That's why phonological and phonemic awareness and pronunciation and articulation are the foundation of word level reading skills. And for decades, we've neglected that. That's why there's a lot of struggling readers out there in our world today. And the next one is advanced. So if I said to you, say the word slip. Now say slip, but don't say, oh, what do you get? Sip. Yes. So your brain has to isolate that second phoneme and then take it out and then say the new word. Okay. All right. I'm moving along. Let's see here. So when we talk about that multisensory teaching or engaging the modalities, we want to really give students ample opportunity to see, to say, to hear, to write, to move what we're asking them to do. So I was tapping with you the phonemes, but you can use cubes and you can push the phonemes into boxes like at, starting with just the phoneme, and then you can layer in the grapheme. What letter represents the sound? Good. M, write it down. Ah, What letter represents the A sound? Good, write it down. T. What letter represents the T sound? Good, write it down. And you can slowly work students from just phonemes to mapping them to their graphemes. And then what's our word? Our word is mat. Okay, so these materials are just very helpful for learning phoneme grapheme correspondences and beginning in the early stages into alphabetic principle decoding, and then eventually being able to read as if by sight. Whiteboard and marker, cubes or those bingo chips. These are called Elkonin boxes. So they're just sound boxes. And then later we put the grapheme in like you see here. But initially we just maybe use a chip, a coin, a piece of candy, something like that. Okay, so when we think about that phoneme grapheme or sound symbol or sound letter mapping routine, we first say the word, right? So I said like the word was shack. Then we stretch it, we finger stretch it, sh, a, k. Then we count the sounds. There are sh, a, k, 3. Then we push 1 sound at a time. So with those chips that you have perhaps, or if you have, I'm just using bingo chips right here. I can use bingo chips if you have them. You can use, let me see here. Open up my webcam and show you real quick. If we have a minute. Everybody looking at my webcam? Okay, so if I were to map, right, I could say shack, sh, a, k, sh, a, k, 3 phonemes. So I need 3 chips, okay? And then I say, all right, let's think about mapping them, sh, a, k. And then we get to the layer of the grapheme, the letter, and we say, what letter represents the sh sounds? Oh, it's actually 2, right? SH. What letter represents the A sound? Good. And what letters represent the K sound? Good. And then I even have you don't have to get this, but I even have a magnetic wand. And so then you always want to go back and have your students blend. So the word is shack. And when you have them blend, they put all those pieces back together, and that helps their phonological working memory, because in their phonological working memory, that's when sometimes in their phonological working memory, students will say sh, a, k, and then go back and say crack or sh, a, k, back, because they're remembering these ones together. But their phonological working memory might be weak, and they need to strengthen that. And they can't go back and hold all of these phonemes in their phonological working memory at a time. So they say this and just say any phoneme here. So in doing so and making them go back and blend it, you're practicing that and making sure that when they're reading, that they're able to do that as well and hold those phonemes. Okay, I'm mindful of my time. Let me come back. This book that I have on here is, oops, I'm sorry, I don't have my spotlight. A good resource. It's called Phonics and Spelling Through Phoneme Grapheme Mapping. It's a good resource if you want to look into it. I would go to Sopris West. Miguel, can you type Sopris West in the chat? SOPRIS West, and perhaps you can go to Sopris West to look for this book, because it's about $40 on Sopris West. And if you go to if you don't go to the publisher and you order it on Amazon, Amazon gouges you a little bit, and I think it could be like way more. So if it's something you're looking into for your students in teaching word level reading skills, that might be a good place to go. Okay. Plus you have access to this PowerPoint. You can come back to it. These are some books that we utilize in the MED and Reading Specialist program in our dyslexia track. so that these might be areas that you want to pursue future learning. If you're interested in this, if you want to read more about it, if you or just have a particular student in mind. And then just some information about Carlow and what I do. We offer a dyslexia teaching certificate. We offer this to anyone in our community. So you don't have to be an educator. Non-formal educators, parents, and community members are welcome. And this program that we have has long-standing community partnerships. So feel free to go to Carlow and look at that and come learn with us. And that's about it for today. So I am so grateful that you were here and I had the opportunity to work with you today and spend the morning with you. So thank you so much. Best of luck in ensuring that your learners learn to read.
Thank you. It was very good.
Good, thanks. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.